Hello all you wonderful people, I'm Arn Peter and today I'm making a tutorial. Let's take a look at what we're going to do. So, when I walk on that carpet, something terrible is going to happen. Two enemies are going to drop down, but that's something I already covered in a different tutorial. The thing I'm going to be covering today is the camera shake that comes after that. So let's take a look. Whoa, okay, big, heavy, scary monsters, and that's made all the more clear by that screen shake you just saw. So, that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be using animation curves. Let's get going. Alright, let's go through the prerequisites. There are 3 soft prerequisites for this tutorial. This tutorial should be relatively easy to follow on its own, but if you have any trouble, you can go to the prerequisites. The first prerequisite is the triggers tutorial. The bulk of the code in this project comes from the triggers tutorial, where I show you how to make the imps fall down as a result of the player walking onto the carpet. So you can go there for most of the code. Another prerequisite is the cameras. So if you look at the cameras tutorial, again, link in the description, one of the things I mentioned is these convenience scripts that I like to use, where I can use these little shorter functions instead of the big bulky GameMaker functions. So more information on that in the cameras tutorial, but again, this should be pretty easy to follow. And then I also have a tutorial dedicated to animation curves. It talks about pretty much the same stuff I talk about in this tutorial, but it just goes through animation curves like 50% slower, essentially. Another thing that comes out of that tutorial is the StepTowards function, which I will also be using today, and I'll explain it more when I use it. So that's everything to know. The code is, of course, in the description if you want to just go ahead and download this and start from there. Okay, I think I got all the bases cleared up. Let's get started. Alright, so to start off, I'm going to go ahead and create some starter camera code, and to do that I'm going to create an object, and I'm going to call that camera control. And I'm going to go into the step event, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy the code that I used in my camera tutorial to give us a starting point. There we go. So this just positions the camera relative to the player so it'll follow it, then it clamps the camera to make sure that stays in the room, then it applies the camera position. And I'm going to reorganize this a tad so that you'll be able to better understand how to manipulate it later, because I have another kind of companion camera tutorial talking about camera transitions, and I want you to be able to apply the same logic to the same code. So let me just reorganize it. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead, now that I got it organized, I'm going to go and disable this player following logic, and then I'm going to set some initial values for the CamX, CamY. There we go, so I'm starting off at the current values, and then to apply the shake logic, which I'm going to do after we clamp to the room, we're going to be adding some like offset to it. So we're going to say plus equals something, CamY plus equals something, and that offset is going to be determined based off of an animation curve. So let's go ahead and make the animation curve. So I'm going to call it anim shake. So we're actually going to have 2 of these curves. We're going to have one indicating the offset along the y and one indicating the offset along the x. For as far as the y goes, when the imp hits the ground, it's going to push the camera way down, which I'm just going to range this from 1 to -1, and we'll scale it later. And then in response to going down, it's going to have to go back up again, and then we'll just make it go up and down a few more times. And then finally rest at 0, which means we're not shifting the camera at all from its standard position. Okay, let me think about this for a second. I think I'm going to add another bump in here. I think that could look good. So we can, of course, adjust this later. And then I'm going to apply some smoothing here. So there we go. We got our little animation for the camera shake. So now we can jump back into the camera and apply that camera code, or the animation code rather. So let's go to camera control. Let's go to the create event. I need some initial variables, not the destroy event, the create event. There we go. So we're going to need a few variables here. One of them is shake CX. I set to go to 1. So CX stands for the curve's X position. That's kind of the convention I've been using. And we want to start off at 1 because initially the shake animation is going to be in its completed state where there's no shift whatsoever. And then when we want to trigger a camera shake, we'll just reset this animation to 0, and then we'll have it progress through the animation from there. Another variable I want is shake max dist. So this is going to indicate how far the shake will shift when it's at its maximum distance. So remember, we have the animation curve from -1 to 1, but we're going to use this variable to scale that, and that way we can adjust how severe the shaking is with this variable without actually jumping into the animation curve. Next one is shake seconds, and this is going to indicate how long the animation takes. So again, we have our curve set from 0 to 1 for along the x-axis, but then we can scale it by the seconds. Okay, now let's go into the shake logic. We need to update this shake CX. So let's say it shifts our animating. We want it to just always be increasing towards 1 in order to progress through the animation. So here's how I'll do that. This StepTowards function, I promised I'd explain it, and I'm going to do that now. It takes 3 inputs: the current, the target, and the step. Current is what our shakex currently is. Target is where we want it to be eventually. And then the last one is how much you want to step by, either increasing or decreasing to get it closer to this target. So the way I calculate this step is shake seconds is how long we want to take to go from 0 to 1. So right now it's at the 0.5. Our room speed is steps per second, which is 30 for me by default. So this is a total of 15 steps. That's how long we want it to take to get from 0 to 1. And then we do 1 divided by that, because if we want to get there in 15 steps, that means we move by 1/15 every step to get there. Does that make sense? Okay, so we have our shake CX. Now we need to retrieve the corresponding Y position to figure out what the offset needs to be. And whenever you're dealing with animation curves, you actually have 2 functions you want to use. First, you need to retrieve the channel, and that works like so. So for the channel, it takes 2 inputs: which curve you're referring to, and then which channel within the curve. And actually, in this case, since we're animating along the Y, I'm going to go ahead and name the Y channel rather than saying the 0 with channel. So now the Y position along the curve is going to be retrieved by using the evaluate function, and that's going to be done like so. And I think instead of calling this shake CY, I'm going to call this Y offset, just to clarify that this is along the Y, because we'll be adding X later. So now for cam Y, we're going to say Y offset. For cam X, we're going to say 0 for now. So it's just occurred to me that I made a little mistake here with the initialize logic. I need this to be at whatever our max shake dist is. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into the room editor to explain how that works. I believe, what's my room called anyway? Arm inside, cool. So if I go in here, right now the view takes up the entire room, but if we're going to be shifting it to either side, as is, it's going to go outside the room. So we actually need to adjust our view till there's room padding on either side. I'd say the correct way to do this is to make the room bigger and shift all the tiles, but that's kind of tedious for now, so I'm going to go with the less ideal solution and just make the view smaller. So that kind of automatically gives us some padding on either side. So I'm going to go into the viewport, and we want 5 pixels of padding on either side, because that's where our shake max dist is. And if we want our max distance to be bigger, we're going to have to adjust that accordingly. So in here in camera properties, I want to adjust the width, decrease it by 10 on both of these. So that way we'll have space for 5 pixels of padding on either side. And the X position is going to be 5. This is going to also be 5. Excellent. So then that's why we're initializing our CXCY at the max shake distance, because that offsets it a little bit. And then, you know, if you at some point switch back to following the player, if you made a bigger room, for example, you wouldn't need to do this. This is only necessary to give us like a starting point. And then on that same note, in this room clamping logic, so you'll notice that I'm clamping before I do the shake. Or let's say we clamped after the shake. If you're at the edge of the room, that means that the clamping would like cancel out that shake effect, because it would just be bumping against the side of the room. So instead, I'm going to clamp first, but I'm going to update this clamp logic to make sure that it clamps with some padding on the side to leave some room for the shake to move over there. So we're going to be clamping from max shake dist. On the other extreme, it'll be minus max shake dist. Make sense? I just noticed an issue here, which is embarrassing because I just recorded a previous tutorial with this issue. I'm gonna have to fix that in editing. Oh well. What's happening here? Why do I get these things? Unassigned variable max shake dist. That's because I called it shake max dist. I have everything prefixed with shake to make things consistent. Okay. So are we all set here? Okay, let's see if this works with the along the Y, and then if it does, we can actually. Whoa, I'm not all set here. What am I doing? So there's nothing right now. There's nothing triggering the animation, which is a problem. So within the Goomba / imp character, when it hits the ground, I want it to trigger this animation, and we do that by changing the CX variable, resetting it back to 0, which will make this step towards animate back to 1, and it'll trigger this little animation. But I don't actually want the Goomba to directly adjust this variable, because that creates like a strong couple between this camera and the Goomba. This camera won't be able to make any changes to the shake CX variable without making a corresponding change to the Goomba. So the way I handle it is I create a function. I'm going to call it shake camera, and all it does is it sets shake CX equal to 0. So the nice thing about this is the Goomba can call shake camera, and then from the camera controller's perspective, it needs to make sure to always have this function available, but at the same time, it can make changes to this shake CX or add more things to this function freely without having to take into consideration of the Goomba. So if I go over to the Goomba and look over here at its logic, this y min 160 dy yada yada, this tells it to keep adding dy until it hits 160. So I need to add some logic here so that the shake is triggered once the Goombas hit the ground. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to say if our current y is less than 160 and y plus dy is greater than 160, meaning we haven't hit the ground yet, but we're about to hit the ground, that's when we want to trigger the shake. So within the camera control, I'm going to call that shake function. Excellent. So I'm going to go back to the camera control one more time before I actually run this. And I want to add some debug code so that I can easily test this. So I just want to be able to restart the game when I press R. There we go. Alright, so let's give this a shot. Okay, we walk up here, they fall, and there's no camera shake. Womp womp womp. Okay. Let's see what we did wrong, shall we? Ah! Always the simple things. I forgot to add the camera controller to the room. I bet that's what it was. Okay. Whoop. There we go. That was pretty good. I'm proud of that. Boom. Boom. Okay. That's pretty exciting. And just for completion's sake, I want to show you how to animate this along the x-axis as well. So let's add another curve here along the x, and we're just going to kind of do the same deal here. And I think I'm going to do something, very similar, except I'm going to make it not as big, which kind of makes sense because there's a vertical motion triggering this shake, so I'm not going to have it shake as much along x direction. And just to kind of vary it from the other one, I'm going to make it be at a higher frequency, so I'm going to add more ups and downs. So let's see, maybe something like that. We'll give that a try. Now I got to go back to the camera control to add logic for this. So I'll just be duplicating this logic. So I'm going to call that CHY so I can keep track of that. And then I'll duplicate it. And then just change all these Y's to X's. So, and then I can call X offset here. And kind of personal preferences, I actually like to do X first. One thing you might be noticing, we're using shake CX for both places. That is intentional because confusingly maybe, this X refers to the X along the curve, not our actual X position of the camera. So that's something to keep in mind. Now let's play, and I think we should be good. I always check recording time expecting it to be not very long, but we're 20 minutes in already, even though but it felt like time just flew by. Alright, let's see. Excellent. Alright. So that's working. That is the final product of this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Before you leave, I want to mention that this is part of a playlist where I'm making a bunch of tutorials about animation curves. I have this basic platformer game that I made in a separate series, and I'm just pumping it with as many animation curves as I can, because animation curves are just simply awesome. Something I like to do at the end of each of these tutorials is talk about animation principles. So there's something called the 12 principles of animation. Every aspiring animator learns about these in their first class, and I found that a lot of this animation curves tutorials, a lot of them apply very directly to the animation principles, so wanted to mention them for further learning. So the animation principle I want to talk about today is called exaggeration. As an animator, you're trying to communicate something about the characters in your game. If you want to communicate something, you often want to apply exaggeration to make it extra crystal clear. So in this case, the game was perfectly fine with the Goombas, imps, whatever, just falling down from the sky and hitting the ground, but we want to communicate these guys are big, scary, and mean, and heavy. So adding this camera shake, maybe this wouldn't happen realistically, like for something to be big enough to like shake the camera, but exaggerating and adding this camera shake really helps drive the point home. These guys are big, scary, and heavy, and all of those things. So that's the principle of exaggeration, and that's how we used it today. Alan Becker has a great video explaining this concept further, as well as the other 12 animation principles, and I will be linking that below for further reading. So that is all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in other animation curves tutorials, and I'll talk to you guys later.